Yeah, spend.
Hello.
Hammasi chap tarafda ekan, uzr.
Yo'q, bemalol.
Suvni nima qilyapman-da, undan qarab.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Well.
Very good. Good morning. Good morning, colleagues, partners, and welcome to the panel of Capital Markets of Uzbekistan. Once again, thank you very much for taking part in EBRD AGM 2023 in Samarkand. I very much hope you're enjoying it. At least the weather is definitely better than yesterday. My name is Jahan Shamsiv. I lead EBRD financial institutions operations in the region, with major focus recently on Uzbekistan, and I will be moderating this panel today. Before we begin, few organizational things. First of all, this panel is English only, so please don't be misled by these devices in front of you. I believe that will speed up the conversation and make our dialogue, if you like, more efficient. The second point, we have 4 distinguished panelists today with immense experience in different areas related to capital markets. We are going to be focusing on Uzbekistan only and hear from the international experience of the panelists. The way we are going to structure it, I will make an introduction of each of the panelists when we'll be asking the questions that we together with Asaka Bank prepare for them. The third point is that this event is the partners event organized by Asaka Bank, the major sponsor of the EBRD AGM in Samarkand, and the partner we've been working with for a long period of time in the country. Though these are the major points, and now moving to the subject of our panel today, we are very pleased to see such a presence, such attendance of interested parties, in particular with interest in capital markets. We share that interest. You might, if you were following Uzbekistan's the performance of Uzbekistan's economy, you might have noticed that the country was growing very fast despite the challenges presented by COVID or recent geopolitical conflicts. And any economic growth needs funding, needs money, needs financing. Uzbekistan has done a lot already when it comes to legislative reforms, drafting laws and preparing the foundation to improve access to capital markets, and the process is ongoing. We are going to focusing on this topic today. What else we are going to discuss today? We are going to discuss opportunities for local companies to use IPOs to raise capital, both in the country and outside. We are going to inquire from our panelists about the debt markets, local and foreign, in particular given the experience that Uzbekistan had to date. We also are going to seek the view of international investors about what they need to see, in particular in the country, in local companies, to be able to more actively engage with them in terms of capital markets. And finally, we are going to discuss the role of commercial banks and central bank and authorities in developing capital markets. This is what we are going to focus on today, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you the first panelist, George Peresashvili. George is CEO of Tashkent Stock Exchange in Uzbekistan, I think for the last 6 months now. George comes with wealth of experience. In particular, his last role was CEO of Stock Exchange in Tbilisi. And before that, George worked in Wall Street and London City, being responsible for various aspects of stock exchange, securities clearing and settlement, brokerage, and other related activities. So, George, the first question to you, if you would allow us, is we've heard many things about IPOs of local companies, state-owned companies, corporates in Uzbekistan at the Tashkent Stock Exchange. So effectively, you're the person responsible for the exchange. What would be your views on challenges the companies are facing and prospects the companies have in raising capital at Tashkent Stock Exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahan. Can everyone hear me? Is it working? Okay. Thank you, Jahan. Great question. I think that question is on everyone's mind. What I can say about upcoming IPOs, first of all, as some of you may know, there is a list of 40 companies, state-owned companies and banks, which are slated for privatization over the next few years. And of course, the big question is whether those IPOs will be successful. And every time when people ask me what's going to take to make these IPOs successful, I always reply that we need to always keep investors in mind. We need to put ourselves into shoes of an investor and think the way they think. And we need to always keep in mind that investors are investing in IPOs to make money. They need to make money. I mean, this is not a charity business, even though some people would maybe love it to be that way, but it's not a charity business. Everybody is here to make money, and the more money they make, the more successful IPO is, and it will lead to another IPO, predispositioned to be even more successful and so on. And likewise, if the IPO is not successful, then it's going to be harder to make next IPO successful. In order for IPO to be successful, the first and foremost is, of course, the quality of the issuer, the company. And especially if we are talking about state-owned entities and banks, number one priority, and Uzbekistan is no exception, we have seen that in Kazakhstan, in Russia, in Georgia, every country, number one is to ring-fence these companies from government intervention. If you are a bank, the last thing you want to have a government directing you which loan to give to whom at which terms. And you may end up lending to companies or individuals which are not bankable, really. And then what's going to happen, we all know, right? Then you will have to, this loan will not be repaid, then you will have to provision it, it's going to hit your bottom line, and it's not going to end well, right? If you are a state-owned company, non-bank, then again, you may not be the most efficient one because the government is asking you not to, fire people due to social problems which it may cause, and therefore the company is overstaffed. So they can probably do the same job with half of the staff, but they simply cannot, cut their workforce because again they have this social responsibility, and that is also understandable. I mean, I'm not criticizing the government. I say that these are real challenges which you have to take into account every time you are talking about, privatizing state-owned companies. But since you asked the question, what's going to take to make IPO successful, these are the measures. So these companies, they may be state-owned still, but they need to be run as a private company. So ring-fenced from government's intervention, the government should look at them as a shareholder and say, look, do whatever is necessary to maximize my value as a shareholder. But I'm not going to tell you to whom to lend, how many people you should hire, in which projects you should be investing, etc., etc. So that's the best way to manage these state-owned companies. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure that management, the competent management, either it's already there or it can be brought in. There can be employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs introduced to incentivize management and the board to do the best and to basically align their interests with the interests of the shareholders. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, these are all measures which have been around for many, many years. We just need to follow the path, and I think it's going to make them, successful IPOs.
Thank you. So basically commerciality of business, yes, profitability of business, and operational autonomy when we speak about state-owned companies. Now the follow-up question on this one, if we have those companies in Uzbekistan and those terms are insured, would that be possible for foreign companies to basically enter Uzbekistan and invest in those companies through Tashkent Stock Exchange?
Certainly. I mean, Poland is the best example where Polish market thrived to such an extent that not only Polish companies got listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, but companies from Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, all the countries around Poland went to Warsaw. Why? Because the business follows the money. There was enough money, enough capital in the on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and then you saw companies from various neighboring countries going to Warsaw Stock Exchange. Now, going back to your question, on Tashkent Stock Exchange, first of all, we want to make Tashkent Stock Exchange the exchange of choice for local issuers. That's number one. Before you pitch to companies from Kazakhstan, Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, you need to first make sure that local Uzbek companies see Tashkent Stock Exchange as the best place to place their shares or bonds, because they believe they will be able to sell those securities and raise money, raise capital at an affordable cost. And for that, we need definitely not only local investors, but also foreign investors. And one key aspect of bringing foreign investors to Uzbek local market is to open the custody link for Uzbek market. What some people may not realize is that it's much easier to buy a security in a foreign market than to hold it. Because for holding a security, you need to have a global custodian or ICSD such as Clearstream, Euroclear present in the country. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And for that, we are working very hard with the help of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, with the help of the central bank. We are engaged actively with Clearstream. We are engaged actively with a couple of international custodian banks, global custodians, and hopefully within a year, we will have this link up and running. And then we will see a dramatic change in the environment, and the demand will go up, basically, when we have those big names present in Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much. I think we still will come back to the support of the government in development of capital markets. This is definitely one of the critical issues. And also we will touch upon custodian services. Yes, something that is happening in Uzbekistan already, but maybe not at the larger stage. The final question, George, to you at this stage. So now, let's think about global companies. Yes, Uzbekistani companies, developing, growing. Some of them have ambitions to issue the shares at exchanges outside of Tashkent. They look maybe at some banks in Georgia, yes, TBC Bank of Georgia, some banks in Kazakhstan, so they might dream at some point to have their shares listed at London Stock Exchange. Is it possible? Does it provide, again, briefly, any benefits to them? Is it achievable, in your view?
Sure. I mean, there are quite a few companies in Uzbekistan who can potentially IPO on the London Stock Exchange or maybe somewhere else. Their size is definitely the right one. I think whether they are ready or not for international IPO, that is a bigger question. And of course, listing requirements on the London Stock Exchange are much stricter than on Tashkent Stock Exchange or any exchange in the neighborhood. So you need to do a lot of homework, again, improving corporate governance, transparency, having a majority of independent supervisory board members in your board in order to qualify for listing. I mean, for example, Bank of Georgia, since you mentioned that, or TBC Bank, which are listed in the premium segment of the London Stock Exchange, they have to satisfy, among many criteria, the one that even the chairman of the supervisory board has to be independent, and let alone the majority have to be independent. And again, that is a little bit difficult at this moment to imagine happening with the state-owned companies in Uzbekistan, because I think states still thinks that they need to have a majority in the board in order to influence certain decisions. I think that mindset needs to change before these companies get ready for London. And just final thought that from the point of view of a policymaker, if I were the government of Uzbekistan or the regulator of Uzbek capital market, I would think not only about Uzbek companies tapping international markets and bringing money to the country from London. That is great, and probably it's going to be a very good thing for the shareholders of that company. But the bigger question is whether it's going to work and do any added value for the local market. If all the best companies from Uzbekistan get listed only in London, there is nothing left in Uzbekistan. There will be no trading, no brokers, no auditors, no evaluators. I mean, there will be this ecosystem which usually works around the capital market. That will never develop in Uzbekistan, and we want Uzbekistan to thrive. London Stock Exchange is a great exchange, with or without Uzbekistan. So we need Uzbek market to grow, and I think for that we need to first see local companies listed locally, and then maybe internationally. That's what I would go for.
Thank you very much. So effectively achievable, in long-term perspective, but again, has to be balanced, and before the competence of local exchange has to be developed.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. It's time to move to the next panelist. I would say very well known in this sector, Odilbek Isakov. So us personally at EBRD, we used to contact with Odilbek on regular basis. Odilbek has held the position of Deputy Minister of Finance for 3 years, from 2019 to even for 4 years almost yet, to 2023. And during his tenure as Deputy Minister of Finance, he has achieved a lot, in particular with focus on capital markets. In particular, number of laws were kind of developed and adopted by the government, by the parliament: law on the state debt, law on public procurement, law on public-private partnership, and also law on capital markets. But I think more importantly, Odilbek has been known as the major specialist in Eurobonds in the country, both sovereign bonds in both currencies, and also I believe that he assisted a number of local banks and companies to issue the first Eurobonds at the London Stock Exchange and other exchanges. Odilbek, thank you very much for taking part in this panel. We very much would like to seek your view on the prospects of using Eurobonds for raising capital for local companies, what challenges you've been through, do you see potential for this type of funding, and any experience you might find relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jahanneke, for kindly introducing me, and I would like to thank Asaka Bank for inviting me in this panel, and it's great to see all of you, and I probably know most of you already. In terms of Eurobonds, I think yes, we've had some success in the last 4 years accessing the market, which was in historically best time for decades. Yes, I don't think that 2019, 2020, even 21 conditions in the global capital markets will return in the next decade. I don't think so. In terms of yields, in terms of focus on emerging markets, in terms of if you look at the global picture, global inflation environment, rate hikes and resultant movements in US treasuries, mid-swap rates, and other components, building blocks for a bond pricing. However, I still do think that Eurobond market offers a significant opportunity for both the government and corporates, public and private, to finance themselves going forward. Because now is the time to accept reality that the rates will not go down in the near future. So next 2-3 years, we are stuck, ladies and gentlemen. This is the rates we're going to have to live in for a longer period of time. And you know what? Maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, LIBOR rates were similar. Emerging market issues of similar credit rating or quality to Uzbekistan were issuing at 7-8% rates. Emerging market issuers, more advanced and more, let's say, experienced issuers, have already been accepting this reality and issuing at 7-8-9% yield levels. I'm talking about sovereigns. And to date, I think the primary market, not like in 2022, now 2023 primary market in the first quarter, now the we are in the middle of the second quarter, has been much better than whole of last year in terms of the issuance volumes, in terms of issue premiums, other fundamentals for the bonds. So that's why I'm not in the government anymore, but what I would advise is to look at this market from a longer term point of view. I think that it offers, as mentioned, significant funding opportunity. As I'm in London now for the last 3 months, I've been talking to a lot of investors, and they are open to Uzbekistan, Uzbek sovereign particularly, to open the market, because we have been absent for 2 years since 2021 for obvious reasons, including Uzbek sum denominated bonds. And the reason, again, with my friend Georgi, I disagree a little bit. The reason I think that London or global capital markets are important is because of one simple fact which we cannot ignore. domestic capital markets in any market will not be able to develop in isolation from the macroeconomic fundamentals of that given country, including GDP per capita, saving rates, domestic deposits, and many other building blocks, financial markets, money market, that I think Ravshan will talk about a little bit, government bond markets. So these are the building blocks, but in all of these building blocks, domestic savings play such an important role. Secondly, domestic level of financial literacy, not just among people, but among the professional community plays a very important role. And third, I would say, for all this to work, we need to have professional environment, professional, state-of-the-art technology, state-of-the-art law, state-of-the-art, all this important infrastructure that supports, underpins the development of the market. And if I can chip in a little bit on that, and I need to correct you because law on capital markets have not been yet passed.
Adopted.
And my dear colleagues sitting here in the front row are working very hard. As I was just going to quickly add government bond market dynamics, if you don't mind, because it's quite important as well as part of the capital markets development here, and why the government of Uzbekistan issued more and more government bonds in the domestic market versus in international markets. Again, the currency risk, need to develop the government bond market. You want to borrow in your own currency for many, many obvious reasons. And we managed, the Ministry of Finance managed to develop this market from 2018 from the levels of $70 million to last year's of $1.1 billion. I mean, if you look at the sum to sum numbers, it's grown by more or less 20 times. But one fact is very interesting. It's grown because of the banks. Most of these, probably 99.9% of the investors in the government bond markets are banks. We don't have insurance companies. We don't have pension funds. We don't have retail. We don't have... So those, if you look at the other countries, I'm not talking about developed, but developing more advanced countries. Take Turkey, for instance. Despite all the troubles of the last few years because of the unconventional monetary policy, Turkey's domestic market is still very, very large. And they do a lot of funding in the domestic market. So Uzbekistan is moving towards that direction, but only relying on banking sector. And it's good in a way that banks have now become more professional. We've established primary dealership system last year. Now the banks are, sort of trading in the secondary market, which is good. And the Clearstream that George mentioned is going to be immense help because investors, global investors would definitely come to global domestic government bond market first. I would say in size and numbers, to be honest. So that's probably the next stage. Now we've grown 20 times because of banks. Now it's time to diversify the investor base, let the foreign investors come in. And I'm hoping that foreign investors will also come into our corporate bond market and stocks, because without them, to be frank, it's going to be very hard to develop capital markets on the buy side. It's going to be very difficult, and that's why the regulation, the capital markets law, the Clearstream link, the infrastructure that my colleagues are working, trying to combine the depositories and making sure that everything is up to international standards. Central bank colleagues are very helpful in terms of on the capital flow movements. They're very, very open to discuss that as well. And currency exchange is much deeper now than before. I was told $100 million a day in a FX market. That's a good starting point for us. And EBRD is doing an amazing job in terms of helping us both on the global markets, on the financial money market, as well as capital markets. They're helping us a lot. And this is all sort of pushes into one thing that at some point when all the infrastructure is ready, the legal and technical, and when foreign investors will eventually come, the market will be more professional
and more ready.
More professional. So that's why, just to complete my sentence, is that in the near future, rates will be high in the dollar market. Everyone should accept it. We cannot influence that sort of rates market, unfortunately. The funding costs will be high, but it's a reality that everyone needs to accept and move forward. Sovereign, non-sovereign. Domestic market is good. Sovereign should do more funding in the domestic government bond market and to develop it further, and hopefully with foreign investors. And of course, corporates should be doing domestic, international funding, which they're already doing. And I think it's, in my opinion, that's how things will move forward here and internationally.
Thank you, Adilbek. And in addition to that, basically, the pool of investors also needs to be more diverse. So not only commercial banks, but also pension funds, like other investors. Thank you very much. Also, another question, very relevant for you, but please be mindful of time.
Sure.
You spent 4 years in the Ministry of Finance, the most influential ministry in financial area of Uzbekistan. What impact, what support is needed from the government to support development of capital markets? Maybe the major points, because you already were part of.
I probably touched upon some of the issues, yes, of course. But again, my colleagues, former colleagues, they're doing an amazing job. I think law on capital markets is fundamentally important. I think that they need to speed up and make sure that it gets through the chains of approvals. And the infrastructure is very important. So the legal and technical infrastructure, these are probably number one items. It should be on the agenda. And on the technical infrastructure, again, we need to have single depository. We need to allow the foreign custodians that George mentioned as soon as possible. And of course, the many people who are aware of Uzbek capital markets know that some of the technical issues we have, like on the IT system, etc., which has been resolved somewhat during the last 2 years. But nevertheless, we need to sort of find a proper solution, IT solution, which will either continue or upgrade the current IT system that the current stock exchange has, or they need to replace it. So 2, 3 things. And of course, financial literacy. I cannot say enough about financial literacy. Because financial literacy among people of Uzbekistan, again, maybe I'm a little bit over-exaggerating, but financial literacy of average Uzbek and financial literacy of average, let's say, Englishman is the same. They know literally nothing. What makes two markets too different is because of the financial professionalism of the market. Yes, the traders, the salespeople, the risk managers, the whole ecosystem that you mentioned or George mentioned was created a long time ago. And if we compare ourselves to other emerging market countries, again, they have done the attempts to create, some with success, some with not success. But take Latin American countries like Brazil or even Colombia, the local Peru. The way they're conducting business, the banks, the interest rate derivative market, swap market, lots of those complicated technologies already embedded in their, financial system. Things that we're doing right now, they've done it like probably 20 years ago. So we need to create professionalism in the market, and I was hoping that this primary dealership system would start that, because then banks need to hire experienced traders, then the salespeople, then the risk managers, and this will then move on to research. Then once the investment banking units are more or less created and they're active in the financial markets, trading government bonds, interest rate swaps, potentially currency swaps, then it will move to corporate bonds and equities, and then this is how the market will sort of grow in itself. And once banks start making money, George mentioned everyone needs to make money, so banks should make money, then they will start making more and more of these investments. So far they have not done much, apart from creating primary dealers. And I would like the banks to do more on this, because their role is immensely important to develop any capital market.
Thank you, Adilbek. I think we will touch upon that a bit later about banks. And what I can add, that we as a BRD, we trying to do a lot in the area of developing necessary legislation alongside our colleagues from other, alongside our partners, DFIs. And infrastructure also, I think, is gradually kind of taking place. Definitely there is a move in the right direction, and thank you very much, Odilbek, for your valuable comments on that. So colleagues, we looked at equity market, local, foreign. We effectively benefited from invaluable comments of Odilbek on debt market, sovereign, corporate, local, international. Let's now take completely different direction and move into speaking to investors. Yes, so to hear from the investors what they are interested to see in the market in Uzbekistan to become more active. I would like to introduce to you, I have a privilege to introduce to you John Tonelli. John is Managing Director of Open Hire Debt Capital Markets Group. John has incredible experience in capital markets. Among other things, he spent time in senior positions in Bear Stearns in JP Morgan. What John does in simple terms, John effectively helps local companies in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan to get access to capital markets abroad, international capital markets. So John, question to you. What would it take a local company in Uzbekistan, someone who is looking kind of to access capital markets, to get that access? How difficult it is? What effectively you are looking for, and how can you support those companies? Thank you.
So, thank you very much, and thank you, Osaka Bank, for inviting me. You know, I think that a lot of what Odilbek said is very relevant here. You know, the macro context in Uzbekistan is key, and regardless of how advanced or sophisticated the local companies are, without a good, you know, rules of the game, it's difficult for them to access the international capital markets. But the first thing is obviously accounting. That's the one thing that tends to derail and slow down the process for companies to access international capital. IFRS accounting, and you know, accounting firms that are recognized internationally. That's key for local companies. You know, clear diligence and obviously, you know, very transparent financials is what international investors, I think, pay a lot of attention to in a primary way. Obviously, investors that buy securities of companies in the region want to be able to also sell those securities, and so if with a strong local market, institutional investors locally that are going to be able to provide liquidity on an exit, that would be very important. Not just looking to other international investors, but you know, really the local investors need to be leading that effort. And Odilbek mentioned some other markets where that's, you know, they've been able to do that successfully. Here, Turkey obviously is a country where you've got very strong institutional support for local securities. I'm talking about apart from the exchange, just in the private markets. Mm-hmm. Brazil, Mexico, and even small markets like the Dominican Republic and so forth have established very, very strong local currency markets as well as dollar markets. So, you know, the investment always starts with the hard currencies. U.S. dollars and euros here, I think, would be the primary one. But ultimately, you know, what's going to really benefit these companies is if they can fund themselves in local currency, especially if they have local revenues that have to go to the foreign exchange market and buy currency to service their debts or so forth. And so, you know, I think that a strong local market with lots of liquidity is something that would be important. Now, how do you do that? Of course, the banks is the first way to, you know, the banks is key. But here, you've got a high concentration of government ownership in the banks. So then necessarily the government has to be the take the initiative and provide that liquidity and give the banks, especially the state-owned banks and so forth, the wherewithal to be able to provide a bid for exit. So I think the foreign capital comes in, but it always likes to have a local component. Is there a local bid for the securities? And if there is, that makes it more attractive for foreign investors.
So again, thank you very much. So banks are necessary, yeah? In addition to like the criteria that you mentioned for local companies, IFRS, maybe corporate governance, and it's still doable. Do you have advice for local companies? First of all, do you have Uzbek clients that you work with?
Yes, we do.
Yes. So what would be your advice? These three major things local company in Uzbekistan can do to kind of get access to debt market, start explore maybe expanding the cooperation, expand kind of the available options. Those three things, the most important one.
Well, I think the local. Can you hear me? I think the local banks or the local companies here, the most important thing is the governance and the accounting transparency. A lot of local companies don't yet have the scale to be able to attract big investment. But the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of investors that are looking for very solid local players that have good dominant position in the market. And my advice would be to register with the stock exchange, to open up their accounting. That's the most difficult part is to relinquish some of the control and lack of transparency and control that some shareholders like to have. That's not just here, that's everywhere. And so think a little bit about having more shareholders and opening, and maybe it's not necessary to have control over the company. 51%, if you had only 30%, you can still control the company, but with a much bigger pool of investors around, it's dispersed. So, I think that's a mindset that takes a while to, get acclimated to, and it takes some time because it goes contrary to traditional, And obviously, in other markets, this has been going on for a long time. Here in CIS, if you compare it to other emerging markets like Latin America, where these reforms have been going on for a long time and companies are more acclimated, the markets are more developed, they're going to get there. It's just going to take some time.
Thank you, John. So listing in a way provides its benefits, yes?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And now moving to our local panelist, I would say, but with international experience. So I have a pleasure to introduce to you Ravshan Kadyrov. We as EBRD, again, have known Ravshan for more than 10 years. And since a couple of years ago, I believe, yes, Ravshan is the treasurer of Asaka Bank, one of our good clients. In partners, and he is not sitting quite there. So Ravshan is behind a number of, I would say, innovative structures that has been implemented in Uzbekistan. I very much hope that he will tell us about that. Ravshan has more than 15 years of experience in various areas of international banking. In particular, he previously worked at Citibank, New York, so basically was based in the United States, and came again a while ago to Uzbekistan to in a way kind of shared his experience and competence here in local market. Ravshan, a question to you. We've heard so many things about banks, commercial banks, yes, that effectively they are providers of liquidity, they effectively are buying bonds, they're doing different things. You as a treasurer of one of the largest commercial banks in the country. So in your view, what is the role of commercial banks of Uzbekistan in development of capital markets of the country?
Well, first of all, as a host partner and according to the hospitality of the Uzbek culture and our humble tradition, I would like to thank EBRD for organizing such an event at the historic city of Samarkand. And I think just to reflect upon the fact how much this historic city has witnessed from the flourishment of the Silk Road all the way to the discussion of the future capital market of Uzbekistan. But, to address the question, obviously, as a direct proof of some of the things that have been said so far, Osaka Bank has actually been the first bank to establish a custodian account for EBRD. And through the brokerage and dealer agreement, EBRD was able for the first time to access the local securities market and was able to secure through Osaka Bank the purchase of the government bonds. And I think this already speaks for itself because in addition to that, recognizing that EBRD has a large investment in Uzbekistan, and most of which is actually in local currency as well, as a private equity capital, as a outright or syndicated loans, as part of the risk-sharing framework agreements with local banks, right? So recognizing that there is a need for EBRD to manage their local currency exposure in Uzbekistan, Osaka Bank, in addition to the custodial account, established a correspondent account in Uzbekistan in order for us to be able to effectively help EBRD to manage their local currency exposure. So, I mean, the precedent is set, and it's the result of the work that has been done by Central Bank and Ministry of Finance so far. But the question is, main question is, how advanced can we get from this point? And what do we do about scaling this industry-wide? And I think, in addition to all of this, as one of the largest commercial banks, partnering with other commercial banks as well, and having a regular dialogue with Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, international institutional investors, Osaka Bank is offering a full spectrum of services, and we are developing sort of a relatively new business area for Uzbek banks, which is investment banking services, custodial brokerage services, right? Why is that? Because we do want to have the capability to serve financial institutions group. We do want to have a capability of serving institutional investors, global investors, in terms of providing full spectrum of services, starting from liquidity and cash management to payments and FX services, custodial brokerage. So I think it's very important to recognize the fact also that Central Bank is also doing quite, advanced approaches in terms of, for instance, allowing for commercial banks of Uzbekistan to establish correspondent accounts for non-banking FIs. And using that opportunity, Osaka Bank was able to establish a relationship with StoneX, one of the major providers of the local currency payments, commercial hedges, precious metal trading throughout the world. And now, because of this relationship, StoneX was able to add Uzbek Sum currency, if I'm not mistaken, as a 142nd currency in their portfolio that enables local currency payments for their corporate clients, institutional clients, which range all the way from Deutsche Bank to Bank of America and to UN, UNDP, Mercy Corp, and any of the multinational corporates that do business in Uzbekistan or have a subsidiary that is domiciled in Uzbekistan. So I think this already proves the fact that, recognition of the Uzbek Sum and the availability of the Uzbek Sum is obviously part of the effort of developing sustainable local currency markets. But I think overall, in order to achieve, the sustainable growth, it is very important to continue the policy dialogue between all the key stakeholders, including Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, market participants, global investors, and even the Justice Department, because they're in the center of all the laws and legislations, in order to promote sustainable local currency markets, to develop resilient capital market infrastructure, and most importantly, to enhance and promote the fact that we need to ourselves have a very strong institutional domestic investor base with all the key players that were mentioned so far in this discussion.
Thank you. So effectively you answer both questions, yes, so the role of commercial banks and also the role of the government, yes, in making this happen. Now, the second question would be, again, based on your experience, as a treasurer of one of the largest banks in Uzbekistan, you deal with investors, yes? You secure money, you work with us, you work with the wider pool of different investors. What would be your advice, again, from your experience, maybe 3 points to local banks? How can you get to those investors? How can you be successful in securing investment from international markets, in local currency or foreign currency? And again, be mindful of time because we also need to have some time for Q&A.
Sure. I think at this point, to answer that question, it is essential to outline the role of the central bank as the regulator of commercial banks. As Ivo mentioned rightly, the role of the commercial banks is immense right now. So otherwise, in order to unleash the potential of commercial banks, the role of the central bank is very important. First of all, in providing commercial incentive. Because you can have all the market infrastructure, all the proper laws, but if you do not have liquidity, it's just not going to work. So central bank needs to make sure that relevant regulatory procedures in terms of the banks being able to use local securities or even international securities not only account for their liquidity and use them as an instrument to manage the short and long-term liquidity processes, but also to be able to account for them in terms of rating. And if we talk about rating, I think it's also essential that the central bank needs to guide the commercial banks in terms of having, okay, do we use and enhance the local rating companies in order to rate the corporate securities that are issued locally? Or do we use the international companies? And either way, we need to recognize that it's important for banks because they do use these securities for balance sheet management. And obviously, Uzbekistan, transferring to IFRS, there will be a lot of questions from international institutional investors and even some of the international stakeholders on the worth of those papers on the balance sheet of the banks. And the question of pricing also closely related to that. How do we price those local securities? The question even gets even more trickier when you factor in the fact that what should be the discount haircut for those securities. And after reviewing most of the bank's methodologies, one would certainly come to a conclusion that another task for central bank is to probably guide the commercial banks in terms of developing a more universal method of assessing counterparty risk. Because all of the banks currently have various counterparty risk methodologies that are set forth by the supervisory board or independently proprietary, in-house methods that are used to develop that, which directly limits their ability to participate in the market, which obviously directly reflects the available liquidity in the market. So overall, I think, and I don't think it will sound overly optimistic or overly patriotic when I say that we are literally at the threshold of underwriting the great future of the new Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much, Rafsan. Thank you very much, colleagues, gentlemen. I believe it has been very, very helpful, informative for participants. Now it's time for Q&A, so effectively to manage again our time. We've got 12 minutes for any questions you may have to the panelists. Okay. Sorry, Bruno. It doesn't work.
Oh, hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Bruno Valvanera, currently in the board of QQB Bank, before in Asaka, before EBRD. I have a follow-up question from the Economic Forum in this same venue in November with the presentation of Uzautomotors, which is currently the only IPO that has reached the market. I understand the number of shares that were placed was far below the expectation, and the price has gone down. In reflection, how do you assess this first IPO?
So I believe it's a question to
Maybe
George?
to George and...
Yep. You started.
Then Odilbek is going to correct me if I deviate from the line.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Bruno, for asking that. Look, I think Uzauto IPO was a good showcase how IPOs, what lessons to be learned from that IPO is that you need to be always very careful how you approach the market. You need to do your homework. You need to prepare really well for this IPO. And most importantly, you need to be ready to set the right price for the IPO. I think if we are talking about any drawbacks or lessons learned from that IPO, the number one would be that don't be too aggressive on pricing. Be cognizant of the fact that Uzbekistan is still a frontier market with all the inherent risks which are priced in every IPO or any bond offering. And you need to be cognizant of the fact that you just cannot sell a company out of Uzbekistan in this environment at the same valuation as a company from, I don't know, European Union. I mean, when investors were looking at price range of UzAuto Motors, they were comparing the valuation in terms of multiples to Volkswagen, General Motors in the US, etc., and the big established names. And of course, I mean, they thought, at least the price reaction after the IPO can demonstrate that they thought that it was too pricey, too expensive. Again, I think management probably maybe should have listened to underwriters more carefully. Maybe they should have accepted a little bit bigger discount. As you rightfully mentioned, the stock price after IPO went down by 20%, then it's up a little bit, but it is still below the IPO price. And of course, we as a market, we don't like that because that creates a negative publicity. Then the next IPO, when it comes to the market, people will be more cautious, more conservative in their approaches. I think that's a lesson that we can learn from this IPO.
Thank you.
If I can add, this was the biggest IPO in the history of Uzbekistan, ladies and gentlemen. Biggest. Okay, not hundreds of millions, but, decent $5 million IPO of one of the largest companies in Uzbekistan, who's done capital markets transactions before in London, and with good corporate governance, good profitability, good prospects, etc., etc. And the team, and I have yes, pricing point perhaps George. Again, we need to discuss that because I've looked at the weighted average cost of capital, how it's calculated, all these things kind of make sense. But again, to my original point of size of the domestic market, we were hoping there will be more retail demand, to be honest with you. Maybe as much retail demand as there is for their cars. But this was overestimation, and it taught us, the market as well, a very useful lesson that retail demand is not as much as perhaps some people expect, yes? And people would rather keep their money in bank deposits earning 20-23%. Mm-hmm. Those financially literate people who are still trusting the banking system, they put their money in bank deposits, not in shares, right? And they have probably, point. Secondly, we've seen some institutional money, which is great to see. And there's also, don't forget, the negative publicity that we've seen in the market ever since the IPO was announced. And UzAuto is somehow controversial name in Uzbek media. Like Uzbeks love driving their cars, they pay their money up front, but for some reason they don't like the name. I don't know. It's a little bit of a paradox, but it is what it is. So some players who can influence the people's minds, they were negative on this IPO, and unfortunately it perhaps also to some extent negatively affected the demand from retail investors. Yes, initial estimates were about $20 million equivalent, 200 billion sums. That would have been even greater success. But nevertheless, I don't want to undermine the success of this IPO being the first IPO in the market, which is a very small market with lots of its challenges, and $5 million is a decent amount. And there are more to come, if I may just add a few things. More focus on people's IPO, which I also respect where it's coming from, but again, going forward as well, if I can provide a word of advice to underwriters, learn from this. It doesn't matter if you change the system from e-auction or, I don't know, other platforms. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, as long as it's done as per law, as long as it's done through the regulated exchange and settled properly, what medium you use and how you attract the people, it's a secondary issue. But in terms of the size of IPO, unless there is a large institutional bid, whether it's foreign or domestic, on the retail, I think it's better to be more modest than perhaps was the case in the first IPO.
Thank you. Thank you, Ulbek. Thank you, George. Any other questions, please? Yes?
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. I think I'll have a very quick question on capital markets. I think, George, you can take it. I mean, from investor perspective, our capital markets are still quite small, right? Especially to attract Western money. So is there any plan that Central Asian countries together, like SMU, like Capital Markets Union, being created? I think some of the post-Soviet countries, Baltic countries are doing a great job on this, creating this sort of Capital Markets Union to increase the ticket and list the index. Is there any plan? From a political perspective, yeah, President is doing a great job, like working with neighboring countries. You know, a lot of unions are happening. From capital markets perspective.
Okay, so basically,
like
are there any intentions to create any kind of regional platform?
Regional
Can
index.
you please introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Nabi Togaev from Uzaman.
From Uzaman, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so who would like to take that question?
Yeah, you can take it. Thank you.
I constantly get these questions, you know, whether it's possible to integrate, you know, Central Asian markets, you know, Kazakhstan, maybe Tajikistan, Turkmenistan next to each, and Kyrgyzstan, of course. And yesterday I attended this great panel discussion about pan-Baltic capital markets, how they created basically one market in Baltic states. You know, and you have NASDAQ, OMX now running basically all three exchanges as one. And it doesn't make any difference whether you list on Tallinn Stock Exchange, Vilnius, or Riga, it's all the same. Well, it looks, I know it looks very attractive on paper, but it's much easier said than done. What helped Baltic states to have this to create this one market is the harmonization of their legislation. They are all EU countries, as you know, so all these EU directives regulating capital market, they apply there. So they basically harmonize their legislation and regulation to such an extent that it really doesn't make any difference whether you file a prospectus with the Estonian regulator, Latvian or Lithuanian. The procedure is the same, the listing requirements are the same, technology is of course one. And I always say that having one technology is least of a problem, because these days technology is developed to such an extent that you can have one platform to trade securities, whether they are on KASE, Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, or Tashkent Stock Exchange, or anywhere else. That's less of an issue. The bigger issue is how do you harmonize these legislations, because these countries, Central Asia, even though they are neighbors, they don't have the same legislation, the same courts. Imagine you are a Kazakh company listed on the Tashkent Stock Exchange and something goes wrong and you are an investor who lost money. Where do you sue? Do you sue in Uzbekistan with the Uzbek court, or do you sue in Kazakhstan because it's a Kazakh company? So it's a lot of questions, again, because this industry is a heavily regulated industry. Regulation does matter a lot, actually. And you need to have a certainty as an investor about the environment in which you are operating, which listing rules you apply for, which court you go to if something goes wrong. If Kazakh law protects investments more than Uzbek law, then do you want to list on Kazakh exchange or here? Or there are lots of questions. So I think we're not there yet, frankly. I wish it was like in Baltic states, harmonization of legislations, but we're not there yet. And in the foreseeable future, to be very honest, I don't see prospect of these countries harmonizing their internal rules and regulations to such an extent which is going to make it possible to create one market, as you mentioned.
Thank you very much. So me as someone who has regional role, so effectively I travel regularly to all these towns in Central Asia. So I would add to this one that also the maturity of countries when it comes to everything, including financial market and capital market, is different. Yes, so effectively just merging everything and aligning the legislation would not be enough, yeah? But what we're seeing, and that to the large extent is thanks to the Uzbekistan more active role, I would say, in promoting regional integration, is some initiatives, yes? Which is a very good sign. Yeah, we are not there yet, we might not get there soon, but we at least accepted that this is something positive and we're ready to move into that direction. Okay, so maybe the final question, Chris, here you go. If you just could introduce yourself before. You've got the microphone now, thank you.
Hi, Tim Stubbs from Denton's law firm.
Sure.
It's been proven that good corporate governance has a very positive impact on Tobin's Q and on valuation of companies. As the head of the stock exchange said, you want to help people to make money. What is the stock exchange doing, and perhaps also in conjunction with the regulator, specifically to improve corporate governance of companies in Kazakhstan,
so you must,
or in
must
Uzbekistan?
Be the most popular panelist today, George. All questions to Hugo.
Look, we as a stock exchange, obviously we have a role to play, and we have listing rules which require, for example, minimum amount of free float, depending on the category. If you are at a premium category, you have to have a minimum 15%, 1/5 of a free float, which is a pretty decent hurdle for any local company. If you are in a standard listing, which is the next category, you should have at least 1% of free float. Plus, we require actually, it's one of the requirements to have at least one independent board member. Of course, we can go as far as London Stock Exchange, requiring the majority of the supervisory board members to be independent, but we're cognizant of the fact that not every local company is mentally ready for that. So it's an evolution. You cannot jump from, nothing to, status of a, developed market overnight. So you need to educate, local companies and work with them to sort of explain them that, having majority of independent board members is actually good. It's beneficial even for the founders of the company, because they can always demonstrate to investors that these companies manage on arm's length basis, and the owner does not always interfere in the management's decisions. So we do our part, but let's not forget that in addition to the stock exchange, there is also a regulator, and our powers are limited. Basically, maximum we can do is just to delist the company. But there are some companies who might not even care about that, if they are delisted or not, frankly. So I think that's where the regulator comes into play and says, look, this is something you cannot do or you should not do. For example, we've heard cases where joint stock companies announce dividends, basically promising investors that they would pay the dividends, and like a few months later, they canceled dividends. Can you imagine? I mean, if you are an investor, you bought the stock hoping to get the dividend, and you were like expecting, money coming into your account, and all of a sudden you hear that dividend is no longer going to be paid. So that's a wrong message, right, for the market, for the company, to investors. So I think we cannot do anything about that, unfortunately. So, but the regulator can certainly do something and say, look, this is unacceptable. If you announced a dividend, you should keep it and you should pay it. Things like that. So,
I agree. So, and I just would like to add that Ministry of Finance, in a way, was kind of promoting the best standards of corporate governance, at least in the banking sector. So that's why we have the luxury of having Bruno, for example, with us, and there are Shota and Olga. So we effectively, in a way, started seeing certain independent directors in some banks. It's, in my view, something to be repeated for corporate sectors as well, but the importance for corporate governance is becoming visible and clear, yes, to majority of the players in the market. Again, it might take some time. Okay, maybe then the time for last question, then I will have one question before we end, and hopefully we can just continue having the agenda. Volokhan, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for a very interesting panel discussion I've ever seen. And I'm Babakhon Abdullayev. I represent Apex Bank. It's a private bank, just newly opened. And my question is that you covered a lot of issues, interest rates and projections. But in my opinion, on Uzbek market, the trust of population to commercial banks is not enough. And in this regard, in this regard, a lot of money and capital is on the hands of the people under the pillow, mattresses, or somewhere else. And in this regard, do you think that it's a very do you think that the potential of this is really great and we should mobilize it first? And what does government should do to mobilize this capital in Uzbekistan? Because of course we can attract a lot of money from abroad, but I think that the potential on the inner market is great too.
Well, there are two questions. Let's take the first one. Yes, effectively, the question, if I can summarize it, is effectively what banks can do to improve the trust of the population who are investing in those, or giving them deposits.
And how to mobilize this capital.
Okay, so can you maybe, yes, Odilbek and Ravshan as well, if possible?
Can I just, this has been going on for the last, since I joined the government. Since 2018, everyone is talking about this significant amounts of money in people's hands, tens of billions of dollars. It's an urban myth, ladies and gentlemen. Don't trust that. Why? Go to any Uzbek market in Tashkent or in Samarkand, anywhere, and you see how much cash is in use. It's not saving. It's basically, I mean, you go to any European country and there are some certain cash transactions as well. Yes, unfortunately, in Uzbekistan, such cash transactions are quite large. Yes, you buy your car, you pay cash. You buy your flat, you pay cash unless you get a mortgage. You know, things like that. So cash is the king, like literally in Uzbekistan, and therefore people save their money. Of course, they can save in deposits, etc. But the cash is used mainly for everyday consumption and for their own sort of large purchases. And until it's not about, I think, perhaps it's partially because of the lack of trust in the banking system, but it's not necessarily about that. You go to large markets and I don't know how much cash is in there. How much? Not necessarily in Uzbek sums. I mean, look at the market traders. Go to Abu Sahi, go to other large wholesale markets, and tens of billions of dollars cash sitting there in traders' hands. People come, remittance coming, and they're basically using this to pay for purchases. Somebody is building a house, buying a house, again cash. So what I'm trying to say is that number one, I would say a summary is that we should not assume that this cash will come directly to banks or capital markets because we change some magic law. There's no such thing. I think this cash, like in many emerging markets, the cash will stay in the economy, and some call it shadow economy, which is also fine. And this cash can only decrease and move to the financial system only because there is a lot of measures in place in order to improve business climate, in order to make sure that there are more and more loans available so people start getting mortgages or getting car loans. Banks already started deposit war between themselves, so they're taking a lot of deposits, and as a result deposit rates are very, very high. But nevertheless, I think it's a process. It may take, unfortunately, a decade or longer for some of this cash to come to the financial market. I think one good way, and we've seen it in the previous years, of increasing the trust of population in the banking system is really coverage of retail customers by the banks, which has started by the privately owned and state-owned banks. First, they should start offering them loans and then try to take their deposits. That's how it should work in emerging markets. And again, when I was in my previous position, I heard it a lot from very senior government officials. Oh, there is $20 billion cash. Go and get it to capital markets. As if I issue bonds or I issue shares, they come and buy my shares and bonds. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It will sit in the markets. It will sit in Abu Sahi. It will sit in Ipadrom. It will sit in many different Uzbek markets, and people like keeping cash.
Thank you, Odilbek. John, please.
I think that what Babahan is saying is actually true, and I've seen it in many, many markets that people do, especially outside of the big cities, people sit on cash. They don't have a lot of money in the banks, but the banks also sit on cash. Here, the banks are full of liquidity. So what does that mean? That means the banks aren't, investing as much, and so it's not just the people that are hoarding the cash, but also the banks. Everybody's scared to lose it. Just like with that IPO, only 5 million of demand or whatever, and you have to start to engender a little bit more confidence in the system and a little bit more better rules of the game.
Thank you, John. Ravshan, the final remark then, yes?
Yeah. Final quick remark, because everyone likes to answer easy questions. I think the people in Uzbekistan are savvy enough to understand that unless there is a proper protection from inflation of their savings and alternative investments, it's just basically a dead end. We're just going to keep hoarding cash, right? And obviously we understand that in Uzbekistan the most important and significant investments are either real estate or buying a car. So that's to that. But I think the more important point of unleashing the cash is, again, going back to the transformation of the insurance, reinsurance business and pension fund system. That would diffuse the cash into the financial infrastructure, into the financial capital markets of Uzbekistan, and would create more liquidity. I think the full potential lies there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for taking part in this panel. Thank you.